What's going on, everybody, and welcome back. So we're just going to kind of jump into it, but today I am chatting with author J.S. DEWES. I know her as Jenny, but Jenny, how are we doing today?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
I can't complain too much. I mean,
Awesome.
still working from home.
Yep, same
I
here.
mean, I don't know if it's going to change anytime soon, but
Yep,
I'll keep enjoying it while it lasts.
same. Yep, my
Um,
dogs are gonna have separation anxiety, I think, though. So, not looking forward to that.
yeah, I would probably say the same, but maybe my office can at least wait till like end of May, so then my wife's just home because she's a
There you go.
teacher, so then she
Oh,
can just
okay,
be at the
yeah.
home with the dogs, and I'll be at the office. But who knows? Who
Yep.
knows what's going to happen the next 5 6 months? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, just want to kind of start off. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Growing up, going through school, and then kind of how you got to where you are now.
Sure. Yeah. No small task. So yeah, I from a young age, I would write short stories, and I always kind of loved it. But I very young fell into filmmaking. I got my first camera I used my family camera when I was like 7 or 8 and started making movies, and from then I was just obsessed with it. So really, my storytelling background comes from doing that. And I made movies all through high school and did lots of film festivals and contests, and it was always just a super big part of my life. So that's what I went to college for. Cinematography specifically is what I ended up focusing on. But I did some screenwriting classes as well, so I got some storytelling experience that way. And then how I ended up getting into fiction writing was actually through fan fiction. I just started writing fan fiction for some of my favorite video games, and you know the people responding every week was super encouraging, and I was like, this is a blast, why didn't I do this before? And that's kind of what gave me the encouragement to try my own novel, and then here we are with The Last Watch. So yeah.
Okay. So what was some of your earliest fan fiction? What games did you write for?
The very first was Dragon Age 2, which I still to this day am obsessed with that game. I think it was brilliantly written and was just so, so good. So I wrote a bunch for that, really the equivalent of probably two and a half like full length novels
Wow.
for those, yeah. And then what really kicked it off was Fallout 4. I don't know if you've played that or not,
Oh
but
yeah.
yeah, so McCready is actually who my book is dedicated to. Um, I felt like, he was super interesting, and I just really wanted to expand his story and just kind of wanted to keep writing. So I picked that up and started writing it. And that's the one that really took off and people really super love. Still to this day, it gets thousands of views a day. It's insane. So that's the one that I
That's crazy.
really, yeah, would say is the one. But I've written some very short ones for Mass Effect as well, but not nearly as much as for Dragon Age and Fallout. So,
Okay. So have has like Bethesda like reached out to you at all, like going, "Oh my
I
gosh, this
mean,
is
I'm
great."
available, you guys. So, if BioWare or Bethesda wants to hire me, I'm here.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of authors, and several of them always point back to video games as far as like storytelling goes. I mean, do you believe like that some of those people that do the storylines and so forth for games like really need to look into writing novels? I mean, I'm sure some of them do, but do you think more should?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I feel like, a different skill because they have to be written in such a different way. But there are things that translate, just like with script writing, certain elements that translate. And one of the big things is characterization. And I think that's why I love BioWare games in particular so much, is their characters and relationships are always super strong and a big focus of their games. So I would love that. One of my favorite books is written by a BioWare writer, David Gator, um, about Dragon Age Origins was what it was for. So I've always been interested in tie-in. Actually, when I first started writing fan fiction, I was like, I just want to write tie-in. Is that a thing that I can do? Is just write tie-in? And the answer was basically no. Like, either you write for video games, so they let you write the tie-ins, or you're an established author and you kind of can get into it that way.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of hoping that that's a additional path. I always want to write my own original novels as well, but that could be a really interesting additional path to write for sure.
Absolutely, because I mean, they're still doing like tie-in novels for like Alien, and I'm assuming they would do it for Predator too. I don't see quite as many for Predator, but like I'm listening to Cold Forge by Alex White right now, so I can go listen to Into Charybdis, and then I'm supposed to be getting Weston. Is it Och? Osh? I never know how to pronounce the last name, but he's got one that's a tie-in to a new video game that's coming out. So I'm just like,
Nice.
there are always opportunities. I mean, I don't know if you want to write in the Alien universe, but I can only imagine that
Nice.
there'll be some tie-in stuff for video games, more in the future. So I know there's stuff for like Halo and Gears of War and so
Yeah,
forth.
there's a lot of Halo, Gears of War, and Warhammer 40K is a big one too. And then there are a bunch of BioWare ones. There's just not, a whole like trove of them, but there are quite a few there too. They do a lot of comics and stuff too, tie-ins, which I don't know how to write a comic, but I think it would be interesting too. I learned as I go, so
why not?
I didn't know how to write a novel 4 years ago either. So
yeah, because there are a lot of I guess you would say just grimdark fantasy authors, but there's some fantasy authors that write in the 40K world, and I feel like they're like pushing like 5 to 10 books every like 6 months. Like it's insane.
Yeah, they write so much in short fiction too, which I don't know how to write either, but I would like to.
So do you do the National NaNoWriMo, whatever?
NaNoWriMo. I have not ever done that. I wasn't aware of it until after I had like written The Last Watch and was on the path to getting an agent and stuff. And by that time, it was just sort of thing like, all I do is write all the time. Like I have a nano every month by myself. So it wasn't really a situation where I felt compelled to, or needed to rush through it in that way, I guess. But it's always fascinated me and I always want to join, but it's like November is the worst month. Like to do that, with like Thanksgiving and everything and like Christmas coming up, and it always just never works. But I know I think they do one in July too, or like a version of it in July. So I think someday I could see myself using it as like motivation, but right now it's just like I have to write year round. So
you just have your own personal nano.
Yep. Which kind of defeats the purpose of nano because it's supposed to be about community, but I'm a recluse, so.
I mean, I feel like everything nowadays has to be about community, whether or not you want to be a part of it.
Yeah, for
sure. So when did you, I guess, start writing seriously? I mean, I know you said you've written fan fiction and so forth, but when were you like, okay, I really want to write a novel and I want to push it, try to find an agent, try to find a publisher. When was like that decision made?
Yeah, so I wrote my first novel in early 20s. Was it early or late 2015? And that, it was okay, but it was post-apocalyptic, kind of just very tropey, very Fallout 4 inspired, and just kind of practice more or less. And after that, when I realized that post-apocalyptic is actually very difficult to sell in traditional publishing, I kind of was like, okay, what else do I love? And I looked directly to sci-fi, obviously, like space sci-fi. So that's when I decided to write The Last Watch, and that was late 2016. And then after that, I just, kind of ran it through beta readers and took it to agents. I did a lot of Twitter pitch contests and things like that. That's not actually how I found my agent in the end, but, it got me involved in the community, which was, I think, a really good thing, because at the time I felt really distanced from that. I was coming from the film world, which is a completely different beast, full of completely different people, and I didn't know anybody that was a writer at all. So I actually joined an online critique writing community called scribophile.com, and it was fantastic. It's sort of a trade-based system, so you log on, you post your chapter, people can critique it, and they get they call them karma points for critiquing it, and then you can kind of trade chapters that way. And that's actually how I found all of my current critique partners, who we've since moved off the site and just kind of beta read whenever we need to, instead of doing the, online system. But it was a great way to just kind of get involved in the community, and they have forums and stuff, and they have groups that you can join. And it was a really fantastic way to just kind of be like, okay, what's going on in the writing community? Like, how can I figure this out? And that's kind of how I got led to Twitter eventually. And the whole pitch wars community. I never participated in pitch wars, but just that whole kind of online Twitter community as well, which I think helped make me feel a little more like, okay, I'm not totally alone in this. I feel like that a lot, but and especially now, this whole COVID thing is terrible, obviously, but how much of this kind of stuff has now moved online is actually pretty fantastic. You can reach a lot of readers that it would have been a lot more difficult to reach before. So that's all been really good as well.
Yeah. You coming, I guess, to Twitter, I wouldn't say late, but later in the game, I guess, than some do. Yeah, I mean, especially over the past probably year and a half, I mean, it's really exploded just because people are looking for that outlet area, and then they're also looking for, just people to talk to about books in general. I mean, whether you're an author or a reader or a blogger, etc. It's just a great place for just a abundance of information, and then clearly, once the book goes out and everybody loves it, I mean, you're just going to skyrocket up there in follower count and everything, and people are going to start talking about it more. But it's a really fun place. I mean, there's some toxicity in it, but there is that everywhere. So you just try not to doom scroll too much, but but it is a great outlet, to get your stuff out there and to get people kind of interested in it and invested. And then also just to make some friends along the way that you can kind of bounce ideas off of. That's kind of what I've done with my blog. I mean, we've got over 20 contributors now, just because we just can't keep up with the volume that's coming in, especially just with all the delays with COVID. It pushed a ton of books this year. So, I mean, there's just stuff out, every single week, and you've also got self-published going on. It's insane.
Yeah, totally.
So you got to get through a lot of the fluff, but I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there too.
Yeah, for real.
So as far as Lost Watch goes, so did you plot it all out, or did you kind of have an idea and you just kind of went with it, or is it kind of like a mixture? Did you pants a little bit?
Yeah, I pantsed the entire thing. I had no idea what I was doing when I started. I had done some sort of, I call myself more of a concept up writer. I need to know that kind of root concept, which obviously for The Last Watch is the edge of the universe. Problems happen. So I knew some things and I had some vague ideas for characters, but I kind of just started writing and just kind of, at that time I had only written one other novel, and I had done the same thing for that one where I just started writing. So I was kind of finding things along the way. And since then I have developed a sort of pseudo plot structure that I look at, that I've kind of Frankensteined from a bunch of different sources that I honestly couldn't even recall most of at this point. But I think it works well for my pantser brain because it allows for, okay, I know these things happen, but everything else in between can kind of be figured out. And that gives me that sort of sense of discovery that I kind of need to, stay interested and invested in it. But I would say I'm a pantser at heart, but out of necessity. You kind of at a point because, they want to see a synopsis of your next book, but your editor wants to see it. And then, when you get to the option stage, they want to see that stuff. And it's you just kind of have to learn how to do it, whether you want to or not. So
yeah. So did you take that same concept into writing the second book, or did you go, okay, I need to plot this out a little bit more because I've got to know exactly where I'm going, and then if I want to continue, where I need to stop to allow for further exploration?
Yeah. I did write a pretty, not super detailed, but a pretty in-depth synopsis. Not because my editor wanted it necessarily, but more because I felt like I needed to get her approval, more or less, be like, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah. And thankfully it went over well. She had a few good point notes, but nothing that changed it structurally. So I was able to, write it from beginning to end without having to make any big structural changes or anything like that, which is always my fear. I haven't yet written a book where I had to make major structural changes, and I'm honestly not sure if I would be capable of doing it if it did. So hopefully I can just always kind of luck out and get the structure down to start with, and then, going back in and fleshing stuff out comes later. But
I'd say you get your edits back and you're like, I don't think I can continue this book.
Scrap it, start over.
I'm just going to go ahead and put this in the may finish later pile.
Yeah.
Who are some of your writing influences? Like, did you read a lot growing up, and did those kind of carry over into what you wanted to do in the Divide, or did you read different genre than you would write in? Just curious.
Yeah, so growing up, I read a ton. Not a lot of sci-fi because it doesn't really get marketed to young girls, and definitely back then it didn't. So I didn't really know about sci-fi until the original, or the prequel trilogy came out for Star Wars. And then, there was some young adult books that came out for that, that I loved and was obsessed with, and I was like, oh my gosh, sci-fi is a thing. And that's kind of when I learned that there was literature sci-fi that I could read. But I didn't really get into reading adult sci-fi until I was an adult. And it was really after the first Mass Effect came out, that I started sort of re-getting into sci-fi. And I started reading more classics, like my favorite, or what I call my favorite book, is Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke. And I would say was a pretty big inspiration for the last watch, just as far as the sense of wonder, and, the big dumb object trope is my favorite, and it's got that in spades. So that was a big one. I really do like the classics. They are problematic, and there are, parts that you kind of just have to willfully ignore as you're reading. But if you're willing to do that, there are some really, really good things in there. And then recently I've actually, as an adult, read a lot more fantasy. My husband is very into fantasy and into audiobooks. So he's got a billion fantasy books on his Audible. So I just kind of would listen to those, while we did a lot of traveling for work, over the last, 10 years. So I read a lot more fantasy actually than sci-fi. And it wasn't until I wrote The Last Watch where I was like, okay, maybe I should try to start reading in my genre. But ironically, once you start writing, you don't have time to read very much. And I'm a very, very slow reader, and I do audiobooks as well, but with COVID, I don't have anywhere to go, or, there's yard work to do, but only, during the spring and fall. So it's like, I'm kind of limited on that, but I've definitely been trying to catch up more and more with, what has been going on with sci-fi over the last, 5-ish years, but I'm woefully behind, to be perfectly honest.
you and everybody else. Yeah, I was just talking to Nick Martell about it yesterday. The whole not having a commute anymore has really killed audiobook listening for me. I always tell myself, all right, let's try this. Let's nix this, and then we're gonna try this to try to get me jump started, I guess, back into it. So I have actually, and Nick told me to do this yesterday, I've actually turned off all the notifications on my social media accounts. So I'm not constantly looking at my phone. So the only reason I'd have my phone on me is for work email, and then for an audiobook. And so I literally just pocket it, and I'll walk around, do anything I need to around the house. I actually bought a basketball goal, so I'm going to start shooting hoops and listening to audiobooks just to get outside, because I'm always inside.
Yep.
And honestly, whenever I sit down to read a book, and I feel like I'm a pretty fast reader, but I get so I don't know, I start thinking about all these things that I could be doing and not reading, and I go, but I really want to read. But I'm like, but I've got to watch this. I've got, I've got to make dinner after a while and all this other stuff. And, your mind just kind of soars. And I think that's just from probably just me being in the house for a year now. I mean, gosh, over a year. It's been like a year and a month now.
Yep.
So I feel you. Audiobooks used to be my favorite thing, and they still are when I can get to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been trying to do more walks. I have 2 dogs, so it's easy to have an excuse to walk. The winter was rough, as we just got a lot of snow, and it was icy a lot, and nobody shovels their sidewalks for some reason. So
just because they don't want you walking from their house.
Makes it really hard in the winter. So now that it's finally starting to get nice out, I'll be doing a lot more audiobooking, which will be really nice. And obviously the yard, we have a pretty big yard, so it's in constant need of work all the time. So there's always an excuse to go out and listen to an audiobook. So I'm going to take advantage of that.
Bad idea. I've just been so lazy. I mean, I could be taking my dogs for a walk just about every day. I don't know why that just doesn't occur to me. I could do that. I'm usually just like, they're like in the backyard, so they're good. Like they've got
like
plenty of room to roam. But I'm like, I could get some exercise.
Like I sit in my backyard and write or work on promo or do whatever all the time, and they just walk around and entertain themselves. And I'm like, oh, they're good for the day. But my youngest one is starting to get a little chunky after going a whole winter. So now I'm like, oh, maybe I should actually walk her, maybe.
Yeah. So I've got three. So I've got one she's going on 17, but like acts like a puppy when she's outside.
Wow.
And she's all about it. And then I've got, we basically call her a miniature corgi because she hasn't gotten any bigger, and she doesn't eat a ton, so she doesn't get, overweight like most of them do. Mm-hmm. And then we've got one right in between them that's a dachshund mix, and he used to be like super energetic, and then he got a little fat, but then he lost weight, but he hasn't really gotten his energy back. So he's the one that really needs to get after it on walks. So I know all about chunky dogs.
Yeah. She's not too bad. And she's part Pyrenees mix. So she's very just floofy. So I think it looks a lot worse. Like it was pouring rain this morning and she was all wet when she came in. And I was like, oh, you're not as fat as I think you are. So that's okay.
May just need a shave. Maybe just a little bit, a little trim.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you mentioned earlier about not really finding science fiction novels written for younger girls, or honestly even women in general. But I feel like that trend is really changing now, because you've got a lot of female authors that are writing in science fiction. I mean, just kind of off the top of my head, Megan O'Keefe, Essa Hansen are a couple that had just recently released novels. And I feel like it's just kind of getting bigger. Marina Lostetter had a trilogy, I believe with Tor, if I'm not mistaken. Or Harper, I can't remember which publisher it was, but and then of course you've got your duology coming out, so I feel like it's really changing. I mean, granted, we're all talking about adult sci-fi here, but it'd be nice to, I guess, see some YA science fiction novels. Would you ever consider writing a YA space opera?
Maybe. I always feel like I'm just not capable of writing for younger audiences, but I probably, could, especially once I could consider, if I could ever be full-time as a writer and consider, doing different pen names and things like that, like people do. But I actually have a critique partner who writes in YA sci-fi, and she's had a ton of trouble. She got an agent with her book and everything, but them taking it to editors and stuff, it's just not a thing they're buying right now or interested in. I think it had a little mini resurgence a couple years ago where quite a few YA sci-fis came out that weren't dystopian, space-based, like more space opera-esque ones. But I guess it's kind of dying out again, and it's just a really tough market to get into. And that drives me crazy because, like, as a kid, I would have eaten that stuff up. And, the Star Wars tie-ins and stuff I read were great and wonderful, and that stuff should continue as well. But it would be really great if we could kind of put more effort behind that. And I think there are some middle grade sci-fi. I don't really keep up on the kidlit stuff too much. But I do feel like I've seen some middle grade sci-fi stuff kind of come out. But you don't really see it very much in YA. It's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, it kind of like you said, it does that dystopian post-apocalyptic deal. I mean, when they've done the resurgence with the High Republic stuff, and it's kind of all over the place. You've got adult, you've got middle grade, and you've got children's. And I think I've lacked one so far that's come out. But like Justina Ireland had A Test of Courage, which is like a middle grade. And for those that don't consider Star Wars fantasy, and it's actually science fiction, that's a great starter point, for maybe a somewhat resurgence if they decide to go that way. But yeah. I feel like it's hard to write a space opera without like giant battles, space battles, or people dying. It's a little difficult. Not everything is sunshine and rainbows. Up in the galaxy, but maybe one day.
Yeah,
and maybe you can lead the charge.
Yeah, I would love to. That'd be great.
So let's talk about The Last Watch. So clearly, myself and my contributor Jason have read it and loved it. But for those who haven't and those who are looking forward to it, can you tell everybody a little bit about what they can expect?
Yeah, so, how I initially typically pitch it to people is that it's, the Night's Watch from Game of Thrones in space, which I think is pretty accurate. The publisher likes to use just Game of Thrones, meets the Expanse, which I get a lot of questions about. 'Cause it's
So there's
really
dragons?
not that, but yeah, so, that's a good starting point, and then, it's about, a group of kind of misfit criminal soldiers who are kinda, cast out to the edge of the universe, and they're, put up against, a collapsing universe, and they gotta kinda deal with that, and it's a lot of work, but, it's, a lot of space opera-esque things, but more of a modern character-driven-esque space opera, not what you would typically think of, you know, there's not a lot of POVs, at least in the first book. It's just the two main characters, and it's very, very character focused and character driven in that way. There's a lot of familiar tropes as far as, there's, like I had mentioned before, the big dumb object trope, and just military in general is kind of a sci-fi trope typically. There's the royalty in space trope. So there's a lot of that kind of familiarity, but posed against this sort of concept of, a universe that is finite, which some readers might have trouble wrapping their heads around because it's a big ask, to be fair, which is kind of why I tried to balance that with, keeping really focused on the characters and, including a lot of these other familiar tropes that people could really latch onto. And that said, I tried to make a lot of the science based in reality. Not all of it is, but a lot of it is, there is some root back to real science, which I think kind of helps too for some of the more hard sci-fi fans.
So was it a hard sell saying that the universe is finite? I'm curious.
For some people, it was. I had quite a lot of beta readers early on because I didn't know what I was doing, so I threw it at anyone that was willing to read it. And 95% of people just thought it was cool and were totally fine with it. There was actually a physicist who was like, nope. Like, they would not accept it. They were like, you mean a galaxy, right? And I was like, no, I mean the universe, man. But, it was kind of just a thing where it was like, either you're willing to suspend your disbelief or you're not. But I think it does an okay job of kind of explaining how, early on, how the universe works and the different physics, and then moving on from there. So I think it's,
and also how it's fiction, and
right.
It's not like you're writing this to, as a dissertation or anything.
Right. Yeah. I'm not qualified for that at all. I'm not a science mind at all, despite how much science research I had to do. I'm really like, I'm definitely on the creative liberal arts side of the spectrum.
So I'm curious, how much research did go into it? I was wondering, do authors like go out and buy a bunch of, literature, or go to the library and just check out a bunch of books and just jot a lot of notes down? You're like, what does it take to research something that, you kind of expand into the entire universe?
So yeah, I didn't really, read any books because I knew that I would never do it. Like, I would never, like, I'd get this book and I'd maybe flip through and see some interesting things, but I could never read a book like that from cover to cover. Like, my brain does not allow me to have that kind of focus on something that I don't really understand to start with. But I did a lot of Googling, a lot of there's actually a ton of research papers available online if you look hard enough, that aren't behind paywalls or anything, where you can get like a literal research PDF of that someone did. And those are good to skim because they usually have like a summary at the beginning for that isn't by any means in layman's terms, but it puts it enough in layman's terms that I can kind of be like, okay, this is what I want, and then look at the rest of the document to kind of figure out, what are the relevant things. So it's just kind of a weird logic puzzle, which I've always loved logic puzzles, so it works great for me, of just finding the pieces that I know will fit with the concept I'm trying to support, and then, narrowing down on those words or phrases or things that, I can include to help the reader, get on the same page as the characters and the narrative as far as what's really going on. So there was a lot of research. I did, research into universal physics and all manner of physics, actually. and not a lot of it makes it onto the page, but I feel like it's kind of a thing where you kind of have to wrap your brain around it as a whole and then pick and choose what is going to be the best thing. So it was just a lot of Googling, a lot of reading. But yeah, it was fun. I probably have forgotten 90% of what I researched for it because it was so long ago at this point, and I don't retain memory well. But it's, it's just a lot of Googling.
Yeah. Because I'm curious, you read all this stuff and, you may or may not know what they're talking about. And so you go, okay, well, I want to put in some big words and some really cool science, but I'm also worried that it's going to go over everybody that reads it, go over their heads. I mean, were you worried about that at all? With that research, putting it into your book?
Yeah, it was definitely a concern of mine, and not because I thought that it would be like too smart for anyone. It was more just that I wanted it to feel really accessible, even to, saying not sci-fi readers at all. It might be a stretch, but I've had some people who don't primarily read sci-fi who have read it and said, like, I understood it. I'm shocked. And I think that's kind of just a misconception of sci-fi in general, is that it's all going to go over their heads. So they're not even going to try the genre at all. And that's something I wanted to kind of avoid with this and make it so that even if you don't, like you said, understand exactly what's going on, you understand it enough that you feel comfortable in how it supports the narrative and what it means for the characters to kind of just go along with it, which it was very big concern of mine. So it's something I probably spent more time on than any other one focus of sort of the, not really revisions, but even just the research process, was just making sure that everything that went in that was science was something that could be pretty easily comprehensible. And that was easy to a degree because some of the characters that are in it don't understand these things either. So they're able to be like, what's going on, science guys? Science guys can kind of explain to the people that don't know what's going on in a little more layman's terms, some of the more complex things.
Okay. So contributor to the blog and friend of the YouTube channel, Jason, asked, did you have any particular inspiration for the alien technology in the last watch?
It's a good question. I don't think I've got that one before. Not in particular. There was kind of a callback to that Rendezvous of Rama book that I mentioned. They talk about, there's a lot of everything in threes is kind of a theme of that alien culture in it. And that's kind of a similar thing with the Viators, which are the alien race in the last watch, where there's a lot of triangle motifs in their like design structure and things like that. But otherwise, I just kind of, am obsessed with Pinterest. So I have very, very extensive Pinterest boards. So I would just kind of scroll, see something that looked cool and that I felt matched, and then kind of, expand on that to describe certain things.
Okay. So what was, speaking of inspirations, what was a big inspiration behind your two main characters? Because, clearly the focus is on them throughout the entire novel, which I love character-driven novels. I mean, that's really what grabs me. I mean, world building is great, generally for fantasy. I mean, I say there's not a whole lot of world building in sci-fi, but space is just massive, so it's it is what it is. But what were your big inspirations for those two main characters and kind of how they mesh together?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think what started with them more than anything was their relationship. I wanted it to be an example of a male-female platonic relationship that was just really strong and supportive and good from the start. And I think, I didn't intentionally pull from this, but I think probably part of that was the show Killjoys. The two main characters have that kind of same very strong relationship, and one where the female is sort of more in the protector role than the male is. So I probably drew from that a lot for them. And I don't really know where they came from. Again, I pantsed it, so I kind of knew that they existed, that I wanted a female commander, which I probably kind of pulled from Mass Effect as well, obviously. And then there was one image I found on Pinterest of just a guy in sort of a royal getup, and I was like, oh, it'd be cool if there was like a prince, and that's just kind of how Cavalon was born. And then they just kind of expanded as I wrote and became their own people that I no longer had control of, which I know some people hate when authors say that, but it's kind of true.
So clearly we've got The Last Watch coming out on the 20th of this month, April, for those who are watching this a little bit later. And then you've got book 2 set in August. Can you say anything about book 2? And then can you say anything about what may potentially come after?
Yeah, so The Exiled Fleet is the second book, comes out August 17th, which is crazy. And those are the only 2 confirmed books. So we know those for sure. It's not a duology, as far as it's not intended to be one complete 2-book story. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger or anything like that, but it has its own complete story, just like the first book does. I wouldn't say they necessarily work apart as completely separate books. The second book is a direct sequel of the first book. And then as far as the rest, it's just kind of a time will tell thing. It's kind of a thing where we have to wait and see, how will these 2 books do. If they're received well, maybe we'll get to write more. I personally see it as a 5-book series. It's kind of just always how I saw it in my head, even before I didn't really know where things were going. Which things have changed quite a bit since that original thing, but it still kind of fits into the 5 books. So hopefully there will be more, but it's just kind of a thing where we have to wait and see.
Okay. I'm curious. So outside of the Divide, what is another, I guess, kind of like idea you get blowing? Are you thinking about another space opera? Are you thinking about maybe moving over into fantasy, or do you even know yet?
Good question. I would never rule out fantasy. I've always loved fantasy. I don't particularly see myself as a fantasy writer, at least not yet. There's sort of a, common thing where you should try to write in one lane for a while, and then you can kind of expand into, other genres later. So I probably wouldn't think about that for a while. I do have another space opera kind of floating around, which I would roughly pitch as Thorin's Company in Space, which is kind of another, group of, crew going about crazy things in space. But that's sort of so far off on the horizon that I haven't even really fully fleshed anything out much. I did write another book, while I was querying and on submission with The Last Watch, which is it's called Rubicon, which is sort of a Phantom of the Opera in space situation, but military sci-fi. It's weird. But I actually really like it a lot. It's just kind of not in line with, the same genre as The Last Watch. So it's probably another thing where I'll just kind of, I'm not shelving it by any means, but I'll set it aside and see when in my career maybe it can come back and help me out. So
okay. What is it I guess that draws you to military sci-fi in particular?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's that inherent camaraderie probably more than anything, and just that most of my favorite IPs are military sci-fi, like Mass Effect and Killjoys. And I mean, Killjoys is not really military, but it's a military-esque organization. Battlestar Galactica is my favorite show of all time. And, I just like a lot of those things. And I think it's, just that sort of like ride or die crew together situation that I just like. And guns and explosions. I don't know.
I guess it's a way to do like a mercenary crew, like in space, is to do it military style. Yeah. So what are some maybe books that you've read here recently or listened to? I mean, I know we talked about how audiobooks have been kind of maybe a little bit on a downslide in both of our lives here recently. But have you read anything or listened to anything recently that's like, oh my gosh, I've got to talk about this book?
Yeah, I just finished the first book in the Interdependency series by John Scalzi, which I thought was really good. I'd only ever read Old Man's War of his before, so it was interesting to see something a little different. And then I'm in the middle. I've actually been reading a lot of, I'm part of a 2021 debut group on Facebook. So I've been reading a lot of their arcs and stuff too, which has been really fun to read stuff ahead of time. It makes me feel cool. But I've been trying to read more outside of my genre as well, just as like a palate cleanser, because I feel like you get really consumed in your own thing a little much and you can kind of get stuck in your ways. So I've been reading A Tip for the Hangman by Allison, I'm forgetting her last name, Epstein. I have it here.
Okay.
It's incredibly funny. It's historical fiction. Well, yeah, I guess you would call it historical fiction about Kip Marlowe being a spy. And it's super funny and super good. And it makes me realize I should be reading outside my genre a little more, even though I also need to keep up in my genre. So I don't know what to do.
Gotta keep up and see what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, I can't win. So.
Well, I mean, like I said in the beginning, I mean, clearly Jason and myself, we absolutely loved The Last Watch. We both read it, or I listened to it actually, which the audiobook was fantastic. Okay.
I got it on my phone.
Definitely listen to it when you get.
Yeah.
But we clearly both loved it and have been shouting from the rooftops about it. We will continue to do that through its publication. But I definitely recommend everybody check it out. And I've got a pre-order link below. It comes out on the 20th, so in 12 days. So woohoo!
Woo. I actually have the actual copies now.
Yeah, the finished copy. So mine kind of looks the same, but it's got
the ship's a different shape. They picked
it is,
yeah, and a little bigger. Oh, but otherwise, it's pretty similar. The colors are actually, probably can't tell on here, but the colors are actually a little bit different too.
Okay, well, you get a finished copy now because it's different. So. Yeah, exactly. It's like, God, I gotta get different editions now. But I really want to thank you for being here and for writing such a phenomenal story. And I'm definitely looking forward to the Exiled Fleet when I can get to it. And I'm sure Jason is as well. But everybody go pick up a copy. And Jenny, we will talk some more. We'll do this again. And awesome. Jenny's actually signed up to be on TV Archon 22 next year. So woohoo! So that'll be fun. Some more information on that will be coming out as well. But yeah, everybody look out on the 20th for The Last Watch. So Jenny, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Enjoy the rest of your week.
Yeah, you too. Bye.